What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be going over the Magicka Necromancer DPS. So the macro pretty much has remained exactly how it has been in Dragonhold, being that interesting mix of being not great when compared to other magic DPS, but it is the only class with major vulnerability at this time, and so in an all Magicka DPS group, you're still going to want Magicka Necromancers in order to get that major vulnerability, despite the fact that other Magicka classes can pull higher DPS than a Magicka Necromancer. So they're in this sort of interesting spot where their DPS is not great, but because they have that unique debuff, they're pretty much highly valued in Magicka heavy groups. So for this particular build, just like our other DPS videos, we won't be going over any gear, at least not very in-depth. I will be talking about a few gear options that you might want to consider on a Necromancer. Necromancers are a bit unique compared to other magic DPS because they do have the Death Knell passive, which does give you additional crit chance and execute, and so you might not necessarily want to wear Mother's Sorrow as a Necromancer, because then you have over 100% crit chance and execute, which is basically a waste of the set itself. So there are going to be a couple of other sets that I will mention here that you might want to consider running instead of Mother's Sorrow on a Magicka Necromancer. Beyond that, this video will be focusing in on the skills and the rotation. So let's go ahead and get started here with those alternative sets rather than Mother's Sorrow. So I have 3 sets for you today that I think would be fairly good fits on a Magicka Necromancer. I am currently wearing Elemental Succession, which is a light armor set that you can get from Maelstrom Arena. So you will need to be able to clear Maelstrom Arena in order to get this set. Now, the armor pieces do come from normal Maelstrom, so you don't necessarily have to run it on Veteran, but if you are farming for a Maelstrom Inferno Staff or Maelstrom Bow, you might as well hold on to any Succession pieces that you happen to get. The other set is going to be Siroria, so we're still running Siroria here. Our body set is just going to be Succession. Now, you can swap these 2 sets out because Succession is also a proc set. However, it's a little bit hard to get an Elemental Succession Inferno Staff, so it's kind of up to you which set you want to wear on the front bar there. The 2 other sets are going to be Dragon's Grip. This comes from one of the new dungeons, so while the 3 and the 4-piece bonuses aren't really all that useful for DPS, the 5-piece is still fairly strong, and with Siphon ticking very often, you do get a lot out of the Dragon's Grip bonus, so this is a potentially decent set to run on a Magicka Necromancer. And the last one is going to be Spell Strategist. So this is a Cyrodiil set, so you can buy it off guild traders, or you can try to earn it through AP. This is also a proc set, so much like Siroria, you can wear it as a front bar set instead of Siroria, and this just gives you 500 spell damage whenever you deal damage to the light attack. So between Succession and Spell Strategist will give you more raw damage because it gives you 2 spell damage versus Succession's 1 spell damage. However, Succession is going to be very, very consistent because it doesn't require you to really light attack as often. If your weaving is very good, then Spell Strategist is going to give you a little bit more DPS compared to Succession, but it's kind of up to you which one you want to get. Again, Succession does require you to have access to the Maelstrom Arena, so if you don't have access to that, you will want to run Spell Strategist instead. But that's pretty much it for the gear differences between your typical Magicka DPS build and this Magicka Necromancer build. Onward to skills. So for our front bar, we have Ricochet Skull, Stalking Blastbones, Unnerving Boneyard. Now you can use the other morph, which is Avid Boneyard, instead for your self-synergy. It's kind of up to you how you want to deal with that. Unnerving Boneyard does give you that AoE Major Breach and Major Fracture, which is very helpful for ad pulls. So in reality, you might not need to run Unnerving Boneyard. If you have multiple Necromancers in group, only one of you will need to run Unnerving Boneyard, in which case everybody else can run Avid Boneyard for a little bit of additional damage. Then we have Mystic Siphon, Inner Light, and Shooting Star. You can also go with Glacial Colossus on the front bar if you'd like. That'll give you 50% additional crit chance in Execute, but I find 40% is pretty good. It'll have you sitting at around 96% crit chance in Execute, so there's really no need to have Glacial Colossus on the front bar. On our back bar, we have Skeletal Arcanist, Mystic Siphon, again for the damage done bonus, as well as additional Death Knell passives. We have Unstable Wall of Fire, Barbed Trap, or you can also run Channel Acceleration if you aren't able to be within melee range in order to get Barbed Trap to proc. Inner Light again, and then we have Glacial Colossus. You can also replace this with another Gravelord ability for some more crit chance and execute, but it's kind of up to you whether you want to do that or not. Now, I also want to point out that we do have a little bit of a different CP setup here compared to what I have on the Magicka Gear video, because we do have, where is it, Dismember, which gives us some additional spell penetration, so we actually don't need any points into Spell Erosion, so we can have 0 points into Spell Erosion, which gives us a few more points to play around with, so I have 75 into Elemental Expert, 66 into Elfborn, 66 into Master at Arms, 23 Staff Expert, and 40 into Thaumaturge. You could drop Thaumaturge down a little bit more, 37 or 34. It's kind of up to you how you want to play around with that. I would probably drop it down to 34. That way you can bump Master at Arms or Elfborn up to 72. That'll just help you hit the jump points there. All the other CPs do remain exactly the same though. That pretty much covers it for skills. Now let's talk about the rotation. So you have really two different types of rotation, but they all center around Blastbones. So Blastbones does have a arm time, basically of 2.5 seconds. So that's enough time for you to do Blastbones 2 abilities, Blastbone 2 abilities if you're within melee range. Now if you are outside of melee range, if you are further back, you will have to do Blastbones and then 3 abilities, Blastbones and then 3 abilities. So here's an example of that in action. So first we'll do, if you're able to be within melee range. You can see here we have time for we have time for 2 abilities here while within melee range. But now let's go ahead and take a few steps back here, so that way we are now at ranged. This is what I would call playing at ranged. Obviously you won't be wearing Zaan, you'd be running something like Yalnar's or 2-piece crit, and you obviously won't be running Rearming Trap either, you'd be running Channel Acceleration. But here, you can see here we have time for 3 abilities. 2 is not enough. So if you do 1, 2, you see Blastbones is still grayed out. So if you're playing at ranged, you will need to do Blastbone 3 abilities, Blastbones 3 abilities. Now one thing that me personally, I'm not very good at is the fact that the Siphon ability, Mystic Siphon, is off the global cooldown. So you could actually activate, let's get a corpse up. You can activate them at the same. You can activate Mystic Siphon at the same time as another ability. So I'm not personally very good at this, but you should bear that in mind. Now the way that I have been trying to do it is when I see that Mystic Siphon is off, I try to hit the button for Mystic Siphon at the same time as my ability. So for example, if I am need to do Skull, I'll just hit my button for Skull and Siphon at the same time. So for in this instance it'd be 1 and 4, so I basically hit 1 and 4 at the same time. This means I'm casting my Skull and I'm also casting Mystic Siphon that way. So that's how I do it on keyboard and mouse. For controller, you just have to use those 2 abilities, 2 buttons at the same time. Though I'm not sure how the control scheme works for controllers, whether that's will activate some other keybind on the controller. But that's pretty much the rotation, pretty straightforward. It's basically Blastbone 2 abilities, Blastbone 2 abilities, and just make sure you're keeping an eye on your dots. And again, Mystic Siphon is off the global cooldown, so when you need to re-up it, just use it at the same time as another ability. That way you don't have to waste the global cooldown on using Siphon. Now we're going to do a 21 million dummy parse so you guys get an idea of the amount of DPS that we're able to pull and compare it to other classes. Remember that a dummy parse is not necessarily representative of what you would see in a raid environment. We're getting different sustain, different amount of buffs, different amount of debuffs in an actual raid environment. So your DPS might be higher, might be lower, depending on your group, depending on how many debuffs you have, how many buffs you have, how good sustain support you have, etc., etc. So this is strictly for comparison purposes to other builds that I have on the channel, as well as just sort of a longer term demonstration of the rotation. So here we go, let's get started. My Boneyard ate up my Siphon. So the priority here for your dots should be Wall and Trap come first, and then Siphon comes second. Everything else is sort of secondary, or I should say tertiary to that. I got an itch in my nose. Oh, I'm messing up my rotation a little bit here. Now, in an actual raid environment, you might need to be a little bit mindful of when you use your Colossus, depending on whether the boss is on immunity cooldown or not. If it is, just don't use it until you're off cooldown. That does require you to have a little bit of raid awareness. Usually your raid lead will be able to call that out for you. Just be mindful of that before you end up using your Colossus. You don't want to use it necessarily right away. Pay attention to your raid lead or hold reflexes if you're on PC. Oops, I think I reused Siphon a little bit early there. See here that the sustain actually isn't terrible on a Magicka Warden or Magicka Necromancer. Mainly because that Siphon, Mystic Siphon's given us quite a bit of additional resources back. But it's still a little bit of a struggle sometimes. Oh, Siphon did not go off there for some reason. Siphon can be a little bit weird sometimes, just be mindful of that. Sometimes it won't go off. Here, Graveyard did not go off for some reason. Oh, I know why it didn't go off. Oops. Alright, so there we go. A little bit tricky there with the Siphon. I had a couple of times where it didn't go off towards the end there. That's actually fairly normal for Siphon. Sometimes Siphon is a little bit buggy when it comes to wanting to activate, so just be mindful of that and just try to activate it again as soon as you can there. I think it mostly comes into play when you're trying to use Siphon with an ability that has like a drop down, a circle, like Boneyard there. You can see the circle that shows up. It's a little bit tricky, a little bit buggy when it comes to using something like Boneyard and Siphon at the same time. So just be a little bit mindful of that. Is also still around, I didn't get it here, but there is still a bug where sometimes Blastbones will be grayed out entirely and you can't use it even though you don't have a Blastbones out. If that does happen, you basically need to bar swap to the other bar and bar swap back, and that should clear it up. So you just got to bar swap twice in order to kind of clear up if that happens to you, that bug. But here is the parse that we managed to do. 79.1k here, and just for a point of comparison, I did a few other parses earlier. This one's also just shy of 80k. This is also with Elemental Succession. This one here is with Draarken's Grip, So 79.2k, and this one here is with Spell Strategist 78.8k. These are all basically within margin of error of each other, so you can really use whichever set you happen to get first. Again, Succession requires you to farm for it in Maelstrom Arena. Broggerkin, you need to farm for it in the new dungeons that came out in Harrowstorm. But Spell Strategist you can buy off of Guild Traders. So if you just want something to get in, just to get into and just start right away, go with Spell Strategist. But Broggerkin and Elemental Succession are also two good sets if you have them on hand. But that concludes this build video. Hopefully you guys found this informative. Let me know down in the comment section below if you guys have any questions. Again, hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.